Our first guest is Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. He serves on the Senate Committee on Appropriations and the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, as well as the Select Committee on Intelligence. Senator Lankford is a big defender of religious freedom. As I mentioned before his time in Congress, from 1995 to 2009, he served as Director of Student Ministries at the Baptist Convention of Oklahoma and Director of the Falls Creek Youth Camp, the largest youth camp in the United States, with more than 51,000 individuals attending each summer. Senator, welcome to Washington Watch.
Very good to be with you. Obviously been on Washington Watch multiple times, never with a live studio audience. This is a great interaction point.
Well, it's actually good to see you and not just hear you.
Typically on the phone with you, that's correct.
That is right. Let me just start with this by asking you the question, what is the state of religious freedom in America today?
It's a really odd season for us. Religious liberty and religious freedom and the free expression of your faith has been a given throughout American history. And now for some reason people of our country and in this cultural time are becoming afraid of faith and afraid of people of faith. And so there's this work to be able to quiet in the belief that somehow the separation of church and state coming from another letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote, clearly not in our Constitution, but another letter that he wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association, this wall of separation. People are trying to put that up and to say, if you're going to have faith, that's fine to have it, but you need to have it in your church, by yourself, with your family. Don't bring it to your work. Don't bring it out in conversation. Clearly don't bring it out in the public arena. That was never the intention of the protection of faith in our country. We have always been a nation that you could not only have a faith, but you could live your faith, and that's dwindling away at this point as people are becoming afraid of people of faith.
Well, the logical conclusion of that line of thinking or reasoning or lack thereof would be that people of faith could not be motivated by that faith to make a difference with that faith, right. Which, quite frankly, you in the conversations that you and I have had over the years is why you're in Congress.
It's a really stark back-to-back in this particular week to have Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and that recognition now 50 years since he was assassinated, as a pastor, as an outspoken rights activist, as one who spoke on the issues of poverty and of equality and of tearing down racial barriers, clearly from a faith perspective, and he's respected by all individuals within our nation today. And then right after that, a day recognizing religious liberty in our nation and saying, why would we not allow people of faith to participate? There have been earth-shattering individuals like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who brought his faith into the public arena and challenged America by saying, hate doesn't overcome faith, love does. Well, where did he get that? He got that from Scripture and from his own personal faith, and that bubbled out and has transformed our culture in many ways, and we're all grateful for that. We should continue to allow people of faith to be able to live out the expression of their faith and not be afraid of that.
Senator Lankford, today President Trump issued a proclamation declaring today as Religious Freedom Day. And in that proclamation, he said, our Constitution and laws guarantee Americans the right not just to believe as they see fit, but to freely exercise their religion, something you referred to earlier, not just to believe, but act upon those beliefs. And he went on to say, quote, no American, whether a nun, nurse, baker, or business owner, should be forced to choose between the tenets of faith or adherence to the law.
Yeah, no. Again, this goes back to the basic principle. In America, it's not just that you can have a faith, it's that you can actually live the tenets of your faith. And one of the challenges that I talk to people about within the church is not the challenge of the church not able to live the faith, it's that individuals within the church are truly not living their faith outside of their church. The more that we practice integrity and that we practice the basic tenets of our faith, whether we're at home, whether in a business place, whether in recreation, we show a consistency of that faith. And people don't see one person at church and another person at the business, right, but they really see faith lived out. That's where faith makes a difference. As I poke people often and say, if church and faith is only something you do on a weekend, that's not a faith, that's a hobby. A hobby is something you do on weekends. A faith permeates everything that you do. And so when people live their faith as it is actually their faith rather than just a hobby they do occasionally, it has an impact in our culture.
And I think that thinking is dangerous when you look at here's one's personal life, one's public life, right, and there's this dichotomous view that the two do not intersect. It's hard to determine where someone's going to land if they're operating out of these two different worldviews.
Yeah, and I've had folks that have even poked me before. They've said, you were 22 years in ministry before, but now you're an elected official, so you need to set that aside. And I smiled at them and said, not only does Article 6 of the Constitution mean I don't have to do that, which is specifically written towards elected officials, protecting the living their faith. The First Amendment clearly does that. But quite frankly, it's one of our great frustration with people that when they're elected, they become something different. If I was a person of faith at home, I should still be a person of faith here as well. Otherwise, I become something that I'm not.
Right, because people vote for you, elect you based on who you are, not what you are forced to conform based upon the politically correct standards of Washington, D.C. Now, let me address this, or let you address this, Senator Lankford. The issue of religious freedom, while it's sometimes thought to be a partisan issue, it is a bipartisan issue. In fact, you have recently introduced legislation with both Republicans and Democrats to uphold this important principle of religious freedom.
It is, actually, and there are multiple places that we've seen that. And over the course of the history of our country, we've not seen religious liberty be a partisan issue. Go back 3 years ago, when we were dealing with trade agreements with Vietnam and other countries. I thought it was exceptionally important that if we're going to be in a trade conversation with Vietnam, we need to first bring up the issue of human rights, human dignity, and religious freedom. Vietnam has been a serial abuser of people and religious liberty. So I brought up a very clear principle. If we're going to have any trade agreement with Vietnam, we need to first deal with the issue of religious liberty first and to put that in a standard in our trade negotiations. That passed with a bipartisan, overwhelming, unanimous vote that wasn't seen as a partisan issue to say we should lead with that. If there's any piece of leverage we're going to have on a country like Vietnam to say you need to change your human rights principles and your issues of religious liberty, trade should be one of those issues that we use as a leverage. We had bipartisan agreement. We have other examples of that. Frank Wolf has led for so many years in this area in the past, being able to focus and build bipartisan agreements on the issue of religious liberty. We should continue to keep it that way. Again, in our country, for each individual living their faith out, it shouldn't scare someone that I live my faith out and someone who has a different faith is right next to me. As a government, we protect all of those individuals to be able to live out the tenets of their faith. The government shouldn't be partial in choosing one or the other. Neither should we restrict someone. And if you're confident in your faith, why would it intimidate you that the person next to you lives a different one? Live out the principles of your faith and let it make a difference.
Agreed. And these examples that you have given also speak back to what the United States provided in terms of leadership back to the United Nations in 1948. I mean, this is one area where the United Nations has actually gotten it right with their 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, in which they recognize that religious freedom is not an idea just for the Western world. It is a human right. That was driven by the leadership of the United States. And I'm hopeful, and I want to ask you if you are, that America is going to restore its leadership position on religious liberty worldwide.
I believe we can and we should. This goes back to Reagan's principle of being a city on a hill. There are people around the world that want to be able to just live out the tenets of their faith, that they live in a country that doesn't allow them to have a different faith or has a different perspective and doesn't allow them to have faith at all. We lose track of how different the American experiment still is about allowing people to be able to have a faith and to live it even in greater diversity. Most countries of the world are not like that. We're at our best when we're promoting that. Sam Brownback, who's governor of Kansas, is going through the process right now to be selected as the ambassador at large for religious liberty. It's exceptionally important that he passes through the Senate. Our push is to get him through next week so he can get on the task. So he's working with every embassy in the world to say to every embassy in every location, whether you're Saudi Arabia or whether you're Canada, to say this issue of religious liberty should be a part of the conversation. We're modeling it. We need to set the example for that in America and then help push other nations to consider it within their own nation.
We're going to talk more about that in a moment with Congressman Frank Wolf. Senator, thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you for all that you do on Capitol Hill, leading in the Senate on the values issues, but most importantly, as we recognize today, religious liberty.
Yeah, thanks for taking the lead on this publicly as well, Tony.
All right. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. All right, don't go away, folks, because we're coming back with more of this special edition of Washington Watch with a strong defender of religious freedom, former Virginia Congressman Frank Wolf, to discuss religious freedom around the globe.